Hello everybody, it is Mike Levin on Sunday, April 24th, 2022. Just hopping on I-95 North, just crossed the Goethals Bridge, leaving Staten Island in New York City, heading into the Poconos. Boy, I've done a run of videos today. I have done a bunch of live streamings. Some I've kept on my YouTube channel, some I've deleted from my YouTube channel. I have recently crossed over into the 10,000 follower range. I'm at about 10,500 now. Thank you, everybody. I don't know if you're tuning in for my driving talks or for my talking head videos while I'm coding, but in either case, it is an endless flow of things to talk about. Most recently, I have been on a kick of trying to make the difficult to overcome, the initial inertial resistance of all things, mostly projects, mostly the startup steps of getting projects underway, more free-flowing, more natural. I am never not thinking about Charlie Brown kicking at the football, landing on his back, having the football pulled out from in front of him, and how that is a natural state of being, a natural path in life. One of the standard gotchas, the foibles, the initial inertial resistance in all things. You will have footballs to kick at. You will land on your back in trying to do so. And you will, if you want to succeed, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and try all over again. And sometimes you learn, sometimes you get better. Sometimes you leave that Charlie Brown state of being behind you. It's really a shame that's not part of pop culture, of the zeitgeist anymore so much. It was one of the most important metaphors, I think, of our time. The relating to the character who has a very difficult time with just everyday life, continues to be ambitious, continues to be humble, and ambition and humility, striving for excess capacity, but to always live within your means. That, I think, is the perfect state. I speak a lot lately about my financial situation. I don't want it to come off as belly aching. We we sleep in the beds we make for ourselves. And I have my expenses, and I have my spending habits. But I also have my earning capacity. I have someone with very bright lights on behind me who needs to have that reflected back at them a little bit. And I have been spending the better part of 10, probably going on 15 years, polishing my skills at Linux, Python, Vim, and Git. My wealth is inside of me. My assets are those that cannot be taken away. Maybe it's better for the video that I have that brightness in my face. You can see me better, can't you? Yeah, there. Hey, I've never adjusted my own lighting with my rear view mirror here. That's a new twist. Oh, no, I want it to be over in the right. I start off as if going to the George Washington Bridge, but then I don't go over the George Washington Bridge. I cut over to 280, which becomes 80, which becomes the mountains. Lovely drive. East Stroudsburg, those prices are being driven up. Unbelievable. And I have to move again. My lease is up. I've lived about 2 years in this lovely little refurbished, I was the first to walk into it after a recent refurbishing cottage. Wonderful little existence, but the prices are so inflated right now in East Stroudsburg that the landlords are gonna flip it, and so I gotta leave. Such is life, forced change. Whether things are good or bad is all in the state of mind. New normals are the norm. Static personalities, dynamic personalities. I'm a slow learner. I'm a very slow learner, reflected by my slow reading. I think back to high school, and I was sitting in the remedial, whatever you call it, the slow learner class, there with my copy of Lord Fowle's Bane. People would look at me like, what are you doing in this class? I'm like, I don't know. What am I doing in this class? And as it turns out, my slow reading is because I absorb things. I have high levels of retention. I will reread, and I will make sure that I have the point of the thing. And boy, let me tell you, Lord Fowle's Bane by, let's see. Oh, that writer. The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. Uses lots of arcane language, lots of old Englishy stuff. I guess, somewhat in the tradition of J.R. Tolkien, clearly inspired by Lord of the Rings. However, an anti-hero in every way imaginable. White gold on my finger because of that book series. My wedding ring is white gold. Imperfection. Strength because of imperfection. Alloys, because I'm a slow learner, I do very poorly with things like the JavaScript full web stack, Node.js. Tried a few times, been there since close to the beginning. I've been doing static websites with, I guess what they call make processes, since before static websites were even a popular thing. I was doing transforms from hand-coded XML source files using style sheet transformations. And been there, done that, and when I started seeing things like, what do they call it? It's not SA, it's SASS, SAS. I'm like, oh my God, okay, yeah, I get it. HTML got better because of cascading style sheets. And all these technologies are, vaguely Lisp-like in nature. And so they're very keyed to a problem domain. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, they all come together, blending together to make websites. If done well, I would have liked it, I believe. But as it turned out, there is so much overhead and so much fatigue, all the little things you need to know, all the dependencies. And while I like how fast JavaScript execution is once it compiles, the process it takes to get there, oh my God, I just can't even understand, how there's love for JavaScript. It took me a long time to find Python. And once I found Python, it really took me a long time to internalize it, to become a Pythonista, to learn the Pythonic way of doing things in the way that A Hitchhiker's Guide to Python really opened my eyes to. I came to Python like so many other people from other languages first, had a lot of preconceptions, and had to, free myself, heal myself from those preconceptions. And I'm sure I did it the long way. See all these books, learn such and such in 24 hours. Learn it in a week. Learn it in 21 days. Well, I learned it in 15 years. I learned it under a sense of desperation, and it still took me 15 years. What was that desperation? A kid was coming. I realized that my life was changing in ways that, are the stereotypical ways that lives change when a kid is on the scene. I wasn't going to be able to dive into new technologies head first, spend the kind of time that I spent becoming competent at them, if I ever really even became competent at them. But then the carpet was pulled out from under me, the rug pulled out from under me time and time again. So this relearning process, on top of being a slow learner, profoundly damaging to the ego, to my actual career, because what happens is, some technology goes obsolete on you, you maybe do a job change, and suddenly you have imposter syndrome. You ain't worth crap anymore. You can't sit down and start coding in any meaningful way, in any meaningful environment that's impressive or valuable to the people around you. If it's active server page, if it's .asp files, even if you made the change to .aspx, then on the .NET platform, it's as out of style and passé as ASP was before it. So two Microsoft technologies, two things that I thought would be safe havens. Luckily, I didn't go the ASPX route all that much. Once I started looking into that code behind and postbacks, I'm like, this is nonsense. This is garbage. Who in the world, after being betrayed by active server page, would move to something that stinks of betrayal to high heaven? I certainly did, and even though I had a mentor at the time who was like pushing me in that direction, like, .NET and using VS Code.NET as your IDE, just think of it as a text editor on steroids. F that. Oh my God, I am so glad I did not fully embrace that, or another 10 years of my life would have been burned. So instead I made a study of it. I'm like, no. So Guillaume Perot, who reached out to me with a LinkedIn like when I posted my little slideshow, my little Google Keep Scrolling, Google Notes, Keep Notes Scrolling slideshow. Very easy way to compose thoughts. Pressed a little like on it, and I'm like, yeah, I should have listened to you back in, I don't know what it was, like 98. It might have been 96 or 97. 1996, 1997 is what I'm talking about. A friend of mine, a Frenchman who lives in Japan, who was an officer of Scala Digital Signage, previously Scala Multimedia, for many years, who I basically brought on board through my mad search engine optimization skills. When he heard that I was looking at moving off of the Microsoft equivalent of the LAMP platform, which back in those days was IIS, Internet Information Server, Microsoft IIS, plus SQL Server, plus VB Script or JavaScript. JavaScript was on the server those days. Even after Netscape, but before Node.js. JavaScript has always been on the server in some form or another. But I used VB Script. But when he caught wind that I was looking to move the Scala website, because I was their webmaster at the time, off of the Microsoft platform, he's like, oh, and I was going to go to LAMP, some form of Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, Python, or Perl. I got the Ruby bug. I was all Ruby on Rails, very early days. It must have been by that time 2004, so really. Guillaume was like, oh, you should do Python. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. So I didn't like Ruby on Rails, so I tried dumping Rails, just tried doing Ruby. And then I didn't like forced object-oriented notation. And then I didn't like the lack of third-party packages. Especially in those days, everything was being made available as Java client libraries and .NET client libraries. Everything was in Java or .NET, all the client libraries. With the one exception, if you were looking at client libraries, if you needed client libraries from Google for GData and all their pre-Google Cloud platform stuff, back then it was like ad hoc, it was one-off. So Google Data, GData, was the one I needed. They provided their client libraries, and of course Java, .NET, and Python. So I was like, yeah, I'd really like to use these client libraries from Google to hit all these different services. Wasn't so many different services back in those days. I guess it was Search Console, Google Analytics, and spreadsheets through GData, and that was pretty much it. It was before this massive explosion of services, before the cloud was any big deal. And at that time I was working for 360i in New York City. I had left Scala. I moved on to my career in the agency world, the New York agency world. I had been a vice president of the public relations company that launched Amazon, so I was all full of myself. But then I scaled down. It's like, vice president is the same thing as just living a political life with a giant red target on your back. No thank you. So I downsized myself to SEO director on the next job change. And I stayed that way for a while. And by the time I was in 360i, I was definitely a director of SEO, no longer a vice president. But in that role as director of SEO, and 360i, by the way, was a pretty big deal at the time. It was the company that was like, oh, you can still dunk in the dark, when there was a blackout during a Super Bowl. That might have been 2012 by that time. So real-time marketing, real-time, social media. I was with a company that kind of coined the phrase. So with that company, there was this brilliant guy that I worked with named Kevin Garrity. He was a data scientist before they were calling these things data scientists. And Kevin Garrity was like, yeah, and this was also before Node.js, I might add. So I had already identified Node.js as the one language to rule them all. If you're coding inevitably in JavaScript on the browser, why not also code in JavaScript on the server? So I looked at sort of the Netscape lineage of JavaScript on the server, which was an extraction of Firefox's Rhino engine. So Rhino was to Firefox what the V8 engine was to Google before there was an extraction of the V8 engine to become Node.js. So I looked at Helma, which was the Rhino engine, and I discounted it quickly because it was not mainstream. It was off the beaten track. And Kevin Garrity said, you really ought to look at Python. If these are the kinds of things you're interested in doing, you might like it. So I really respected Kevin, and I said, yeah, I will look at Python. And I did. And I never looked back. Well, I've had lots of buyer's remorse once Node.js came out and JavaScript then became mainstreamed as the one language to rule them all, and the full web stack occurred. But then my buyer's remorse went away as I followed the development of ECMA script and all the things they were doing to, Band-Aid and bubblegum it into a modern language. I mean, I think arrow functions, anonymous arrow functions, and the two different scopes, keeping track of two different scopes, is what did me in. I'm like, if I have to go to Stack Overflow every time I need to refigure out the syntax of a language, there's something wrong. If it doesn't stick, they talk about languages that just fit in your head. And there were a handful of them. Like JavaScript was supposed to be one of them. Ruby was certainly supposed to be one of them. But I'm like, it ain't true. That's BS. I call bullshit. None of these things fit in your head if you have to keep re-Googling it every time. Python was the first one that fit in my head. Python was the first one that was a sympathetic vibration. Python was the first one where I felt a kinship to the person who created the language and felt the need to learn more. That JavaScript person, that Heinrich, whatever his name is, Dennis Ritchie a little bit, but out of a necessity, you have to know C, the Go language, because it was Dennis Ritchie's counterpart in inventing Unix, who's still alive and kicking. Ken Thompson, the inventor of Unix, helped together with Rob Pike, one of the Unix file system people. So a couple of the grandparents of Unix got together and created the Go language for Google, and Google uses it for all their systems programming. See, you gotta know it. These are legends. These are titans of the industry, right? So these are my sports. These are my soap operas. These are the interesting stories of our time. This is real news. Okay, yeah, what's going on in the Ukraine is real news. What's going on with the pandemic is real news. So much of the other stuff is just, feeding rubbernecking monkeys need to scream and yell. That's what most of news and media, and certainly social media is, and it sickens me. Every time traffic slows down to rubberneck at an accident and the injuries, I'm like, yeah, this is my species. Oh. Most news is that way. Most things in technology is that way. Fads are mistaken for trends. Trends are only important once they become the pea in the pool of tech. I'm mostly only interested once everyone else has impaled themselves on the bleeding edge. Then I'm ready to jump on the bandwagon. My timing was probably pretty good with Python. I missed the whole Python 2.3 to 2.6 thing, right? So I actually jumped on board at around Python 2.6 when things settled out onto a pretty nice modern Python. A lot of people are still using this. I think it's still the preferred, micro Python in embedded systems. I was very interested. I keep mentioning this friend of mine, but a friend of mine who's a mathematician who, went to school for physics, is now getting into Python, and I am inversely a Python person trying to get into math and physics more. I think she's having more luck in it than I'm having. But both ways, it's a serious rewiring of the mind. Absolutely a rewiring of the mind. So when they started making the move to Python and started getting things like the Raspberry Pi Pico, I think it's called the Pico, I'm like, oh, what does that have embedded into it? Is it Python 2.6 or Python 3 point something? And she was like, oh, it's 3 point something. I'm like, interesting. So I was able to go through the transition from Python 2.6 to 3. I didn't really learn Python well enough for it to be much more than adding parentheses on the print statements. No big deal. I didn't even run the scripts, Python 2 to 3. I didn't have that many scripts. I didn't have that large of a code base to apply it to. And I didn't find putting parentheses around print statements all that difficult or objectionable either. I'm a Vim user, so you write one macro, it's done. It'd be even easier for Emacs people. Okay, yeah, so the desperation, baby on the way. 40 years old, so I'm 51 now, so we're talking, it's 2022. 2012 to 2022, right? 10 years. The kid was 2 years old by, 2012. 1 year old and some change. So I was into it by then. I had made a number of my decisions by 2012, but the process started 2009. I knew I had to choose my bandwagons, and I had to start making long-term commitments. And this is not easy for someone who can't just relearn. So I know people who just write off this stuff as nuance. It's nuance. Oh, you just learned some new syntax. Not me. Nuance and subtlety is both more important than people give it credit for, and harder to master than people generally like to admit or acknowledge. So the person who was telling me, oh yeah, it's full web stack, oh yeah, React, oh just switch from React to Vue, it's all the same, it's just, use VS Code with, power tools, so that person, after building up a code base for practice, just to learn how to do it, then quit and went to work for another place, leaving that code base. It's, I wish them the best, but in my, book, that's slash and burn. I don't like when other people do it, and I certainly can't use that technique for myself. When I have to walk away from a code base and never look back at it, and like just let it go, obsolete, or dump it on someone else, it's a failing. I like to get better at things forever. I like compounding returns. Okay, so again, on that financial front, if you don't have compounding returns working for you, then you're losing money. If you don't have enough money in the bank such that you're making money by just having money in the bank, and then you keep adding savings so that there's a snowballing effect, then you're losing money. Well, I am clearly losing money. However, I am doing the exact opposite of that, where I believe it counts in my mind. You can't take that away from me. And as it turns out, everything you do for hire, and even everything you do for yourself, if you haven't written certain agreements, if you're, it all can be taken away from you. Ownership is an illusion. Ownership is a myth. You don't own crap. The biggest bully on the block owns it. The government owns it. The state owns it. If you're not paying your property taxes, that property gets taken away from you, right? Nothing goes with you to the grave. If our souls are eternal, then what goes into your head might go with you to the grave. The only assets you can develop that may be forever assets are what goes into your mind. Now, if our souls are eternal, not in a reincarnation sense, but in a superdeterminism sense. Okay, so if we live in a clockwork universe, a Newtonian clockwork universe, if the random that's built into quantum physics is an illusion, and one of the great $1 million math prizes will someday show us, oh, that's not random after all, and we live in a super determined world, and a computer could calculate all things down to me doing this video, right? Even if the computer that's necessary to do it is another copy of the exact universe, right? I'm ready to admit, even if we're a super determined universe, there may not be another computer that could calculate everything, because it would have to be inside our universe, and by definition, you'd have various dependency, chicken and egg, what have you, problems. So it could very well be that the only computer capable of calculating our universe, if it's super deterministic, is another exact copy of our universe. The waveform, the complete waveform is, another copy of that exact complete waveform, right? All that stuff. So, if we live in that kind of universe, then it can be replayed from outside the system in a zoo, VCR tape, rewind, multimedia kind of sense. The perspective, the viewpoints of all life from you as a human being down to the potato bug living in a log, to probably the bacteria, and probably the plants, and probably other stuff too. Of course, the fungi has some sort of viewpoint. Even the word view is a failure of labels. But a perspective on life, a way it feels like to be, is the terminology you hear popping up more and more. It feels like something to be a bee. It feels like something to be fun guy. It feels like me to be a fun guy. And so, dad jokes get worked in too. That's always important. Slaughterhouse-Five, Kurt Vonnegut, Thamagarians, or whatever his aliens are. The idea that, you you can just go on a tour as, say, a 4 spatial dimensional being, height, width, depth, and the fact that height, width, and depth are as if cross-section layers of a 4 spatial dimensional object. There's always trouble in the language here because Einstein liked to use that 4th dimension for time, but that's really just one interpretation. One that we're learning is different than the sense that we think about it. I think these days there's something called, Hilbert space. You can plot positions in space through X, Y, Z, N coordinates, right? So, 5-dimensional being, or a 4 spatial dimensional being, can walk through walls and can see your life from any angle it wishes. Look up through your toilet if you want, right? There is no obstacles or barriers on beings that live in that 4th spatial dimension. So we could all very well be exhibits in a zoo. We could be the Truman Show. It is not unlikely. In fact, it's probably pretty likely. And going in the other direction, that would be up to higher dimensions. There's also down to lower dimensions, where you can think about the consciousness of beings in the 4th spatial dimension as hyper-consciousness, consciousness with another dimension, your Mitzelflicks and your Batmites, if you will. However, when you go the other direction, they're like the Tron light cycles. They're bound to a plane, perhaps a rippling membrane, living on the surface of a thing, right? There's a lot of talk these days that we might all be 2-dimensional holograms. We all might be wrapped onto the surface of a black hole. And we only think that we're 3-dimensional, and that the illusion of 3 spatial dimensions, and even the 4th dimension of time in the Einsteinian perspective, is just an illusion. And we're holographic in nature. 2-dimensional beings, like as if you went down. Tron light cycles. We're all Tron light cycles. Zip, 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 zip. We cannot, cross over each other's, paths or whatever. And of course, sci-fi people will always invoke Flatland at this point, a romance of multiple dimensions or something like that. So Flatland has it all wrong. Flatland did a terrible disservice to the mental exercises of people trying to think about existence in 2-dimensional space. But it could be like that. Those beings, and I'll say a few words on that. Round is complex in Flatland. Lines are simple. The more angles you have working towards a circle, the more complex of beings you are. Circles are the simplest construct, because all you need is origin and distance. Spin distance around origin, you've got a circle. It's an easy operation. Easy operations to define a shape means simplicity. What's a line? Oh my God, does it go out to infinity in both directions? Lines are pretty stupid because, in relation to what? You've got an in relation to problem. A line exists in relation to what? Or at least a circle, you say, here's a point of origin, here's a distance, and then here's a circle whose relationship is that distance always from the point of origin. It's got a relationship built in. Lines are much weirder, more complex in my opinion, because you have to deal with things like infinities right out of the gate. So, F flatland. But when you think about the consciousness, it's not your Mitzelflicks, but rather it's your angels living on the point of a pin. How many angels can live on the point of a pin, right? It's when you go in my favorite sci-fi series would call this the up and the down, right? The Culture series that Elon Musk, quotes. His Neuralink company is a reference to an invention from the Culture series by Ian M. Banks. A wonderful question as to what if all these stupid, dark dystopias of science fiction didn't play out, and that a humanoid species actually did well for itself? What if humanoids, much like humans, one of the big questions when you read the Culture series is, are they talking about Earth? Did the culture come from Earth? Well, no, but somewhere very much like Earth. It's completely Earth-like humans that live in the culture, but with internal chemical factories and large genitals and a deep love for life and living, and the opportunity to switch back and forth between male and female, which most people do a few times in their life. And decentralized, like Git. Like, what if humans used the principles of Git to live? No home planet would be all that important. It uses a distributed version control system for humanity. Everyone should read the Culture series, every book straight through. Ian M. Banks died from cancer. He's another one of those ones struck down way too early. My heart goes out for him, as it does for Steve Jobs, Gilbert Gottfried, and all those who were truly architecting humanity's future. Perhaps Ian M. Banks and Steve Jobs more so than Gilbert Gottfried, but let's throw Dennis Ritchie into that mix. We lost them way too soon, before their good work was done. But they show us the way, and they show us how human will can forge our way forward through superior thought. Superior thought leads to optimism, positive visions, and the realization, the actualization machine of those positive visions. You think that's making it up? You think that's pulling it out of my butt? Elon Musk named Neuralink after an invention from Ian M. Banks, books, and life imitates art, just like the flip phones of yore. We're way beyond that now, but the flat tablets, if it's not the flip phones of Star Trek, the original series, then it's those flat tablets of Next Generation, or our iPhones and Android phones in our pockets, no doubt. Right? Submarines were from 20,000 leagues under the sea, and so on. Life imitates art, and sci-fi is just as important of writing as nonfiction, right? People say that, life is stranger than fiction, so that invalidates sci-fi. Wrong. It means that both are equally important. In fact, I'm still working my way through the must-reads of sci-fi. I'm not going to be able to read Lem Lewis? I got to remember his last name, but the wonderful sci-fi writer who people describe as better than Arthur C. Clarke, better than Asimov, but less well known because his original writing was in Polish. I'm Polish by lineage, Russian Polish. I come from that region of, or at least, you know, my Jew crew of the diaspora come from that region. And so I feel we're the silly people, you know, we're the butt of the Polish jokes. You know, that's all just jealousy. And so I'm going to read Lem in English, but he wrote stuff like, you know, what if aliens came to Earth and we didn't even recognize them as sentient beings, and they couldn't recognize us as sentient beings because we lived on a different time scale. Because biological life in its original evolved form is rare, especially on interstellar, you know, traveling species. They've all transcended to machine type things. And the, you know, I refer to him all the time now, Ray Kurzweil, the inventor of OCR, optical character recognition, who is taking vitamins to make sure he lives long enough to upload his brain. Okay, so where am I going? Where am I going? Optimism. Stop me before I sub-reference again. I gotta get who I'm quoting there. It was one of the old Saturday Night Live news guys, the sarcastic one, who, boy, names. I'm so terrible with names. Slow learner, slow reader, slow everything. There's not enough time in life to chase fads. Fads are the enemy of the slow learner who still hungers for mastery. Yin and yang, right? The ancient Chinese symbol of balance between the two energy types of existence. One being soft, and the other being hard. The soft is often yin, referred to as yin, or the feminine energy. And before y'all start going all woke on this, it's not always female. It's not yin is girls and yang is boys, but the soft and the blue and the stormy and the round and the earth-like in the earth-water element sense is one of the energy types. Indirectness, software, Ada Lovelace, the creator of the ARM architecture. All these transgender, female, software-oriented energies. That's yin. And then I'm learning that the other pronunciation that I've always called yang, because that's how it's called, they call it yang, I don't even know, but I'll go with yang, is male, is linear, is hyper-literal, direct, optimized, high levels of competition, and gaming, and Olympics, and close-mindedness, and one right way to do a thing. Those are the two energy types, yin and yang, the soft and the hard, the round and the linear. Well, the yin energy is more difficult. It's uncertain. There's a lot of inventiveness, a lot of motherly spirit, a lot of things leading to things leading to things. And the solutions being non-linear and indirect and unexpected, and a lot of use of existing hardware in new ways, the rewiring, the connecting of dots in unexpected new ways. That's Python. Honestly, Python is a yin, soft, round, blue, female language called Python. Talk about a misnomer. Talk about the hiding of original alpha. Right? So the alphabet itself, alpha, beta, AB, right? Alpha is usually attributed to male and linear, and beta to submissive and round and female. But honestly, if you look at the Greek alphabet, it's from alpha through omega, okay? And alpha is a starting point. Alpha is a sharp letter. It's got points. The triangle-ish character. Linear in nature. First priority of the alpha is to intuitively recognize the value of the omega and to hide it and to obfuscate things and to make you think that there is nothing of value past alpha, and alpha becomes expendable, and beta is put in place of omega and then devalued, because no one wants people to be able to hack the hardware at a low level and to redefine the very functionality of hardware. It makes the alphas nervous. The game should not be redefined on them. They want to lock the game in place. The first priority of an alpha is to hide the omega and to call it beta. That's, it's the original lie. So Python is a perfect example of where a yin-like language is all alphaed up. It's one of the reasons people really vehemently oppose Python when they start to learn what it is. When they learn that white space matters, indents matter. That's the big thing, right? The whole interpreted versus compiled language, the fact that Python is not necessarily statically typed is a big problem. They call it duck typing. Although now with MyPy, one of the biggest downsides of Python for large-scale projects that need to scale, right? Large scale, they need to scale. When you need, Python to be able to run, tens of thousands of, servers, tens of thousands of instances that can't have memory leaks, that have to run in an optimized way, people usually put Python aside and they use languages like the Go language from Google, right? That was invented. This is starting to come full circle, right? You talk enough and the same things of importance start coming up over and over again, right? So there is no one right language. Multiple languages are necessary, and that's okay. And this is my math, right? I can't, I'm not a math person, as my previous videos have stated, but I'm perfectly fine using, the Go language for things where, massive scaling is required, massive concurrency is required, zero memory leaks, easy deployment, contained dependencies. There's this whole list of things that the Go language is so strong for. And people talk about it like the Go language invented all this stuff. No, there was Erlang before it. There was OpenVax operating system before it. All this concurrency stuff, I can't say been there, done that, because I personally haven't. But the technologies certainly have been, right? So the Go language just did it custom to order for Google with their needs. Google scratching their itch, so very valid language. it was done again in a different way with a Rust language. I believe it came from out of the Firefox and Mozilla tradition. So there's very strong technology traditions here, right? One of them is, as I pointed out, the Google tradition. The Google tradition rose out of Python, and from there it became the Go language, and that's more or less the Google tradition, right? It's also Unix, because they went and hired the inventors of Unix and the Unix file system in the form of Ken Thompson and Rob Pike to do their Go language. So the Unix language lineage, the Google camp is comprised from that. Now there's another camp out there, which is really Mozilla, right? If you look back, it's Mozilla, but other names that are slapped on it are Firefox, and I'm pretty sure that Rust has come out of that tradition, and it's yet another reinvention of the C programming language, right? Everything is just reinventing the C programming language to scratch the important itch of the people that are doing it. Go language with Google, Rust with Mozilla, and Objective-C with Apple. Steve Jobs did it too with Apple after Smalltalk, which was a pure object-oriented communication, message passing oriented language, but Smalltalk flopped. Everyone wanted C, so let's do Smalltalk again, but call it C. Okay, that's Objective-C. All right, fine. So everything that's C derived, my slow learner handicap makes me fail on, almost in the way that I fail on higher level math, more abstract mathematics. I have difficulty with certain things, and those things do not exist in Python. All the things that I get tripped up on just aren't things in Python, but they are those very same things that for many years has disqualified Python for certain projects, right? Google themselves got off of Python when they could, because scaling. Those problems get fixed gradually over time, but not in an all-in way. So static typing is in Python now with MyPy. Certain packages in Python truly embrace that, like pedantic. It is what it says, pedantic, pedantically checking the types of inputs and outputs to functions. But I don't like it. When I started looking at, when I do take up web development again, which is inevitable, as much as I hate web development, full web stack has completely turned me against web development. Although I was there at the beginning, I watched it how all started to play out. I was talking about SAS, S-A-S-S, I guess that's it, because there's that other SAS, which is statistical software, which is proprietary. But when I started looking at all this stuff that was required, I was there when Twitter put out Bootstrap JS, so I get it. I understand the unification of user interfaces, but it's this complete duking it out in a Darwinian process with lots of bleeding edge, early adoption, scrap and rebuild, porting code bases. You know, it's the very stuff that I deeply, deeply resent, because it takes me so long to learn a thing and to internalize it. By the time you do, all the rules change. That's the JavaScript full web stack platform. Not for me. However, Flask, I can live with Flask. Pedantic, I get it's faster. I get it's faster because it's pedantic, because all your I/O is statically typed. I'll take a more fluid, free-flowing, less scalable API any day over forced pedanticness. See? I tried Ruby on Rails, gave up Rails because the Rails framework was not for me. Anything that vomits scaffolding generally is not for me. Pylons, I think Pylons was one of the Python web frameworks that I looked at. There's a few web frameworks in Python that do similar things to Ruby on Rails, which is when you're kind of happy with what you've got, you say, okay, now vomit up the scaffolding and then I'll start overriding it. So that's like saying, use someone else's opinion through and through, and then I will figure out how they think and then gradually move it to how I think. So I didn't like that. To salvage my attempt to, move to Ruby on Rails back in, I guess, must have been 2006, 2007. I gave up Rails, tried just Ruby. Ruby let me down. Ruby let me down tremendously. So in that time between 2007, 8, 9, 2007, 2008, 2009. Ruby on Rails let me down. Ruby let me down. I didn't listen to Guillaume Perot. Kevin Garrity echoed his opinion. Okay, two smart people. Two of the smartest people I know, the Cassandras of this stuff, convinced me to look seriously at Python, and I did. 2008, I'm like, Python might be something. 2009, kid on the way, desperation sets in. 2010, kid arrives. Gotta lock and load. Gotta commit. Committed to that kid. Commit to, I don't even know what to call it. A stack? It's not a stack. You need a text editor for life. I will not learn another text editor. Oh my God, do I resent text editor relearning. Cygnus Ed on the Amiga. Wow, what a great text editor. Wish you guys were still around. And the reference to Hitchhiker's Guide doesn't hurt either. Pretty good programmer file editor, PFE, on Windows, on PCs, when I finally made the move off of the Amiga. Oh, what heartbreak. And moved over to Windows 3.1, Windows 95, Windows Millennium, Windows NT, Windows 2000, and yeah, still today, Windows 2000, still not bad. Vista, unvistifying Vista, Windows 10, okay. Windows 11, really? Windows 10 is Windows 2000, stick on it forever. You should have just stayed on Windows 10 forever. There's no reason for Windows 11, you silly, stupid people, Microsoft. So I'm going to be forced into Windows 11 because it's the only way to get the graphics subsystem for Linux, for the Windows subsystem, for the Linux subsystem for this language. You always get it backwards. Common language runtime, common runtime language, Windows subsystem for Linux, Linux subsystem. Come on, Microsoft, arrange your acronyms correctly. Keep reversing it, probably because of prior namespace occupation, right? So, Windows subsystem for Linux, WSL it is. Common language runtime, CLR it is, alright, whatever. But these are not my homes. These are temporary watering holes, right? Windows itself is a temporary watering hole. They don't want it to be. They want Windows to be the one system to rule them all, right? Microsoft is perfectly fine with Linux so long as Linux is a subsystem of Windows. So even though they give you WSL, all roads corral you back to Microsoft Management Tool. tools which you must pay for. First, the operating system that even has to run Windows subsystem for Linux. And even though they're giving it out for free these days, and the operating system is free, Microsoft finally threw up their arms and say, okay, it's not a paid upgrade to Windows 11, because who would do it? That'd be the kiss of death, right? They made that switch in Windows 10. At some point, Windows 10 became free. So even Microsoft sees the writing on the walls, right? So operating systems are free. And they're actually trying to get you. It's almost like they're paying you to do the upgrades now. Please switch to Windows 11. We'll just keep nagging you till you do. Well, Windows 11, when you switch between virtual desktops, your animation is not. You don't have an animation switching between virtual desktops. So Windows 11 finally caught up with, 1987's Amiga N. Flip between your virtual desktops. That's where Windows 11 is. Windows 11 just caught up with 30 years ago. Honestly, right? Windows 10 was a little bit ahead of Windows 11, because at least when you switch between virtual desktops, you get an animation that's as good as the Mac's. The Mac had it longer. The Mac got there first. Full screen virtual desktops that you could left-right keyboard swoosh between. Well, that had a controller, it had a mouse trackpad controller dependency. I think there's a keyboard way to do it. So even on the Mac, I'm trying to get myself to not use the 3-finger swoosh. I think you even have to change the configuration on Windows and on Mac to get the 3-fingered swoosh works. That's stupid. So I'm trying to get myself to just use the keyboard shortcuts. It's usually the operating system key, plus Control or Alt, some combination thereof, but then the left and right arrow keys, and you can switch left and right between your window of virtual desktops, and Windows 10 does it real well. Windows 10 has it down. That was dumped in the move to Windows 11, so you got this funny situation where if you want your Windows, if you want your Linux software on Windows to have graphics, high performance graphics, better than with a generic X server that you can run, which is what I'm doing on Windows 10. But if you want it to run with the nicely optimized high performance Wayland replacement for X Windows, then you need Windows 11. So I'm chomping at the bit to get to Windows 11, but won't do it until that left-right screen animation switching virtual desktops is working, because otherwise I feel like I'm 30 years ago on the Amiga. Come on, you people. Can't the combined force of Apple and Microsoft catch up to, the Atari engineer that made the Atari 2600, the VCS system, who made a modernized computer in its day. This is 1985 technology, really, when it was being developed. 1986 it came out, 1987 when it really hit the market, 1988 by the time I became aware of it, 1989 before, it was, anyone else heard of it. 1990 by the time it was recognized as, almost alien technology, like ahead of its time. And, gone under by like 91. Commodore filing for bankruptcy and its assets getting sold off and my heart being broken. And, everything's been a disappointment since. I listen to these podcasts about the ecosystems in Python, for example. 300,000 pip installable packages. Nuance after nuance. Subtlety after subtlety. Dependency after dependency. I'm like, whoa. The Mac and the Windows platform, and listen, let's say Linux too. In all fairness, not until, Ubuntu ditched the Unity platform in favor of the GNOME desktop did Linux get elevated to about the same level as Windows and Mac, because now there at least is a canonical platform. And in fact, the company who puts out Ubuntu is called Canonical. To truly be Canonical dumped their homegrown desktop environment, their windowing desktop system called Unity, for GNOME. And they put the effort that they were putting into Unity into true Unity, which is the canonicalization of Linux, to have a chance against Windows and Mac. So there's 3 major platforms now. And they all handle virtual desktops pretty much the same way, although Microsoft regressed in Windows 11. So we'll hopefully they'll catch up again. I feel like I'm just belly aching at this point, but it goes full circle, right? There's not that much to learn. When I say Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, I'm talking about all of Python, some of Linux, enough Git to get by, and not all of Vim, but Vim for your whole life, like a big commitment to Vim, right? So Python and Vim are the 2 things you think and work and live in, right? You need to know these things. You need to internalize lots of Python, lots of Vim. Well, not all of Python. It's in the same way, not all of Vim. Okay, so lots of Python, lots of Vim. The parts that you need to achieve mastery. They can't take that away from you. It's an internal asset. It's all free and open source. You could encode it into your DNA if you found a way to someday. They can't take that away from you. It's better than money in the bank. The compounding returns that you achieve, that you win, that you seize, that you take for yourself, no matter what your situation in life, no matter the divorces you undergo where someone gets half, no matter the acts of God that destroy your property, if you don't have the right kind of insurance, whatever things that happen, and eminent domain, the government taking stuff away from you for whatever reason, all property, all possession is an asset illusion. There's no money that's going to become part of your eternal soul. There's no property. There's no bank account. None of that stuff. But the spiritual growth you undergo by internalizing Linux, Python, Vim, and Git just might become part of your eternal soul. You might be able to take that with you. And if the universe is deterministic and it keeps getting replayed and whatever, oh, look at this. Someone is driving in the left-hand lane. I mean, completely putting their life at risk. And headlights came right up. That person, whew, ouch. Yeah, Uncle Darwin is not dead. All right, drive safe. Even when you do the stuff I'm doing with this vlogging while driving, always still drive safe. I'm going, 45 and a 45, which at midnight on a Sunday is slow. The person behind me, you can see their headlights, they're tailgating me with their brights blasting into my rear view. I'm trying not to do that to the person in front of me, but they are dragging their ass. But to stay in lane, it's not a dotted yellow line. You can't go across. And they were doing that on an uphill where it was a blind hill. And as they crested the hill, headlights came on, and I'm like preparing myself to be a witness to an accident. Okay, now someone's about to do it again on the left because the guy behind me don't like it, but it's more acceptable here because it becomes 2 lane, even though it narrows down again right away. That person impatient but smart. The other one impatient but death wish. All right. That's it, right? That's the whole video. What more do I need to talk about than that? The reasons Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, internalizing them, that and being part of you will make the experience for the Thanagarians, aliens from Fahrenheit 450. No, it's not Fahrenheit. I keep getting that wrong. It's Slaughterhouse 5. Slaughterhouse 5. The transdimensional zoo visitors. Make your mind an interesting place for them. Make yourself someone where they'd love to pop in and occupy. You know, don't be an empty soul with a fat bank account saying that you're the winner in life. Be, you know, the full soul with the empty bank account, with a full head, with a love for life. Not Homer Simpsoning yourself, you know. Be physically fit, mentally fit. Oh, the Scouts. If the Scouts were not a brainwashing organization, their Boy Scout, their Scout Oath would actually be a nice place to start with, you know. But they teach you how to be subservient, and that's no good. Youth groups. Anyway, I'm close to home. I should wrap it up before I badmouth too many things. And projection, right? Whatever you complain about is what you fear about most in yourself. If you want to see someone's deepest insecurities and their own perceived imperfections. In fact, I'm going to stop here. I need to make a stop at Wawa before I hit home. But if you want to know someone's deepest, darkest fears and their true character flaws, look at what they complain about. So I shall stop complaining. I'm full of character flaws. I'm a deeply, deeply flawed person. And you know what every one of them is because I'm a slow learner and I resent tools being changed on me. And I'm a tool dandy. I care a lot about my tools, from the keyboard to the operating system to the language to the, you know, the tricks that everyone's using you to corral you into their thing, doing it their way. Yeah, muscle memory, compounding returns over time, free and open source tools. They can't take that away from you. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again soon. Don't forget to subscribe.